Hi, everyone, and welcome to Point of Purchase by Geekspeak Commerce, a quarterly show where we sit down with fellow experts within the e-com ecosystem to talk about all things retail, technology, business strategy, and more. My name is Trisha Williams. I'm your host for today's show, but I'm also the managing partner and client success leader at Geekspeak Commerce, which is an agency, an e-com services agency focused on helping our clients sell more online. So we've got a great episode lined up for you today. We are live streaming, so you're welcome to ask any questions you may have by entering them in the comments field on LinkedIn or YouTube. We'll also try our best to get to as many questions as possible near the end of the show. And feel free to drop us a line in the comments field now just to say hello so we know where you're tuning in from all around the world. All right, so today's episode is called Mastering the Marketplace, How to Win with Marketplaces in 2023. Now, it's no secret that Amazon dominates in the world of online shopping and selling, but most people don't know that there are so many other multi-vendor marketplaces out there, including Walmart, Best Buy, HBC here in Canada, and international players like Tmall, AliExpress, Rakuten, Mercado Libre, Jumia, and the list goes on and on. Even fewer may know about the work that goes into launching and maintaining a marketplace, from niche marketplaces focused on a particular type of product, service, or even experience, to marketplaces owned by some of the world's largest retailers. So with all that said, I'm really excited to welcome a thought leader in the e-com space, specifically in the world of multi-vendor marketplaces. Joining me today is Tom McFadyen, best-selling author and CEO of McFadyen Digital. Hi, Tom.
Hi, Trisha. Thanks for having me on Geekspeak Point of Purchase. It's an honor to join you today.
You bet. Welcome. We're so grateful to have you on the show. So, Tom, over the past 25 years, you've overseen 250 large-scale e-com and marketplace projects while leading your team. And you've also authored 2 e-commerce books, including Amazon bestseller Marketplace Best Practices. So to kick things off, can you share a bit? Oh, there you go. Plug the book. You can hold it up again, Tom. Awesome. Well, there you go. That's available on Amazon still. So can you share a bit about your journey? How did you find your way into the world of e-commerce, and what led you to starting McFadyen Digital?
Oh, thanks. So I started the company 35 years ago, actually in college, and we evolved our service offerings kind of along the leading edges of digital content. So back 35 years ago, we were focused in document management document management systems, which was really the content before web content became popular. So in the 80s, there was document management, which evolved into content management, most specifically web content management. And web content management turned into e-commerce for us in 1997. So about 25 years, as you said, we've been building enterprise scale e-commerce solutions. And 15 years ago, we started building marketplace solutions. Marketplace solutions initially customized on top of e-commerce platforms. And then about 7 years ago, we started using some of the commercial platforms which are available to launch a marketplace. And it's really our go-to-market strategy now is focusing on marketplaces, both the technology implementation as well as strategy formation and strategy refinement for marketplace solutions. We've got several hundred marketplace professionals spread across headquarters in the US, about half the team in India, a bunch of people in Brazil, and a newly started operations in Europe.
Wow, that's amazing. So Geekspeak's been around for 20 years now, and we like to think of ourselves as veterans, but you're definitely a veteran in this space for sure. You've got 15 years on us. So today we're going to be covering a lot of ground, but I'd like to start off with the basics just to set the stage. So I know, Tom, you came prepared with a couple of slides here, but can you help us out and let our audience know what are the key differences between an e-commerce enabled website, dropship, and marketplace?
Sure. So an important part to understand is the difference between pipeline business and platform business, because it is truly a transformation of the business and the way in which the organization works, the way in which processes flow throughout the company. This graphic shows a typical e-commerce or retail pipeline business model, which is a sequential linear set of activities, very labor intensive, have to happen one after the other, be it brick and mortar retail or online digital commerce. So in the far left of the pipeline, we have distributors, manufacturers, suppliers. Inside the organization are the typical activities within the team, or sometimes outsourced to great companies like GeekSpeak, which will do some of these activities we'll talk about. But still, it's labor that has to be performed and paid for by the e-commerce operator or the retailer. First is sourcing goods, which can take a while to find the good products, and negotiating contracts. We've seen sometimes this process can take 1 to 2 months, just sourcing and negotiating contracts for onboarding new vendors, loading the data into the ERP, which oftentimes from the vendor may be a cryptic 40-character product title. Then comes the real value add of merchandising products. I know you guys, Tricia, do a lot of this work for your clients, creating that SEO optimized marketing text that's going to really differentiate this product from the competition. It takes a lot of effort to be done well. In addition to the data, the attribute data, the taxonomy, loading it into a PIM perhaps before loading it into the e-commerce merchandising engine, setting the price. This sounds trivial, but it's an important differentiator between the business model of a retailer, a pipeline business versus a platform marketplace where the seller sets the price. You have to hold the inventory. This is both physically hold it in a distribution center and financially hold it, meaning outlay capital to purchase the goods. And that holding the inventory requires both the capital investment in building out distribution centers, operating expenses to pay the staff to work there, or OpEx to a 3PL that's going to do the inventory holding. Processing the order is typically automated by a e-commerce and OMS system, but still a step in the process. And actually fulfilling it, picking and packing, partial shipment out to the end customer to finally get that dollar. So 8 activities here. Versus on the next slide, we'll talk about what a platform business is. So here we have just 8 major labor categories, one of which is, just 3 on the bottom. We see recruit sellers and support sellers, and in the middle is the automated process orders. Those are the core functions of a marketplace and a platform business. You still have some marketing, of course, for the business, but in the red at the bottom, we see the more academic definition of what a platform business is. It's a multi-sided ecosystem. It has a nexus of rules, which materialize in terms and conditions, and it has positive scaling network effects. I'll talk about that in a second here. So part of the marketplace is defining the T's and C's, which apply to sellers, and that can reference a commission grid or other elements for how much is going to be charged to the sellers. It's a network showing that, for example, a phone system network diagram above. As you add one more node to that network, it's not adding one more connection. If you have 12 connections, it's adding 13 connections. So it really grows exponentially as opposed to linearly like a pipeline business. You still have the customers on the right side, but the bigger difference is the ecosystem of third-party sellers on the left side. Right. So usually 4, 5, or 6 of those 8 sequential activities are outsourced to the sellers. They'll source goods, negotiate contracts, load them into their ERP or their catalog system. They will merchandise them. They will set the price, and they will usually fulfill them. And that gets fed into the network, into the marketplace system. But most of that labor-intensive activity is outsourced to the third-party sellers. And you may have a reseller that resells from one distributor. Resellers might source from multiple distributors. Multiple 3P sellers might source from the same distributor. And that's how on Amazon you get that price competitiveness between sellers, which drives down the price for the benefit of the consumer. And we may have heard stories of how difficult it is for sellers to compete on Amazon. But this actually is good for the end consumer. It drives down the price. And we're seeing more distributors selling on marketplaces, and in fact, brand manufacturers selling directly on marketplaces because they see that as their ecosystem to sell to the customer.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Wow, that was a lot. And I feel like I just went through Marketplaces 101. So thanks for breaking it down for us. And I think what it also highlights for me is just how many people and different stakeholder groups are involved in delivering on a 1P and 3P platform. So that's fascinating. So digging in a little bit deeper, can you highlight maybe some more of the pros and cons of dropship versus marketplace? I know you touched on a couple of them already.
Absolutely. So the next graphic I have here, my last graphic, talks about the marketplace maturity model. And if people can read that, the first party is that the first step in this 5-step maturity model, which is based on CMMI, capability maturity model for those of you familiar with software development. So the first tier is that pipeline business where the operator has to do all of those sequential 8 activities that were shown in that diagram. Sometimes it's 9 or 10. There can be additional steps in there. In dropship, you take out 1 or 2 of those steps, which is typically holding the good and fulfilling the good. And those steps are outsourced to the drop shipper. But the e-commerce operator still has to perform the other 6 or more steps. So it's a minor incremental improvement. It reduces some of the cost. It's a great solution for seasonal items that you may not want to stock a long time, for items that you don't want to have to discount when you have excess inventory. If it's something that's seasonal, only sells during Christmas or a specific holiday. If it's a bulky item like a sofa that you don't want to keep a whole set of those in your warehouse, much easier to outsource to the manufacturer of those to ship directly to the end consumer. Stage 3 is the third-party marketplace we talked about on that last diagram. And then above that, we get into, like CMM, quantitative management and optimizing models. Quantitative management is when you leverage the very rich sets of data that you collect in a marketplace business model on 3P and 1P products, maybe switching back and forth between them, leveraging them to optimize the categories and product assortment, what's physically in brick and mortar, what's held in a D2C fulfillment center, what's sold by a third-party seller, what's sold by a drop shipper. And then on the top tier, optimizing, you have all kinds of different innovations. This is where some of the biggest marketplaces have combined, marketplace for physical goods with a marketplace for services, like a delivery or last mile, et cetera. Marketplace for data or other digital goods, retail media networks, needing advertising platforms, fintech offerings like extending credit terms, automation of a lot of these steps. So there are a lot of ways in which some of the biggest marketplaces have really optimized their operations.
Absolutely. And I like how it's positioned as a maturity model. And I've seen a lot of retailers take this approach for sure. But there are also some organizations that actually start off as a 3P marketplace. Are there any issues with that, Tom?
No, not at all. It's a completely different business model. So eBay has always been a 3P only. So they don't stock any inventory themselves. They don't retail anything themselves. The merchant of record is it's always the third-party seller that is selling the good. Well, in different cases, you can have different merchant of record. So maybe I shouldn't make a generic statement like that. But the 3P business model, Alibaba has scaled to $1 trillion of sales just using the 3P business model. Amazon combines 1P and 3P and dropship as well. So a lot of organizations, especially bigger retailers, will combine both of those, where we see Walmart, organizations that have been in direct retail for a long time and perhaps have leveraged the dropship model, will add on a 3P marketplace. Some to different levels. Target has been a little bit slower in rolling out their marketplace. Walmart's been very aggressive in rolling out their marketplace. And there's a unique use case for each of those different types of business models: 1P, 3P, and dropship.
Gotcha. Okay. So I know over the last 35 years, you've probably seen some things go awry. Just curious if you can share with the audience, what are some of the more common pitfalls that you've seen from brands when launching a marketplace?
I think it's very important. First off, it's very important to get executive alignment at the top of the organization, because it is really a business transformation. You're changing your business from a pipeline to a platform business. And without the executive level buy-in and agreement across the organization, you can get a lot of infighting. So, for example, merchandisers are some of the people who, those employees within a retailer, are some of the most reluctant to have a marketplace brought on, because they feel they're losing control over the catalog, the categories, the products, the quality. In reality, they become more of a curation expertise, and they work with that. But there's a lot of fear of that, fear of cannibalization. But once the organization understands all the dynamics and the benefits of becoming a platform business, they can get move forward and do great things like that. There's an example of a big retailer everybody would know. I don't want to say anything negative about them, but they had one country try it separate with different teams and different websites even. It was a big failure to the tune of millions of dollars. And then in another country, they did it integrated, all on one website, and it was a huge glowing success for them.
Right.
Some other things are, as I mentioned, keeping 3P different from 1P on different websites. That's not a good idea. They also need to focus on seller recruiting. It's two-sided, sometimes three or four-sided ecosystem, but a lot of organizations have, for decades focused on selling to customers. That side, they have the marketing for sellers, marketing to buyers. I'm misusing my words here. So they've been for decades marketing to buyers, their customers, and they focus on that side of the ecosystem, but they don't focus on sellers. So it's important to recruit, onboard, support sellers, and scale up your sellers to gain critical mass and momentum.
Absolutely.
And then budgeting for doing that.
For sure. I can't agree with you more. I think executive alignment is absolutely imperative. And it's amazing what can happen once the entire team embraces the direction of the organization. So totally agree with your response there for sure. So I feel like we can't talk about marketplaces without mentioning Amazon. Now, I'm curious to know, how do you reference Amazon with your clients? Do you view them as a benchmark for best practices and perhaps maybe even an indicator of some of the things that should be done a little bit differently?
Well, they definitely are a leader, and they are a pioneer, and they've created a lot of new category leading solutions, which have become best practices for smaller marketplaces to adopt. So definitely they are that level 5 maturity, as are Alibaba in China and Mercado Libre in Latin America, where they pioneer a lot of new ideas. Sometimes it's Alibaba pioneering them and Amazon trying to catch up to Alibaba, like live streaming or other capabilities or super apps. But definitely they're the top tier. So so many things that they've pioneered, from one-click ordering to the FBA, fulfilled by Amazon, which now Walmart has similar services. Other marketplaces are offering that. Digital media streaming, marketplaces for services, all types of innovations that they've come up with have become eventually table stakes, but features that other marketplaces want to adopt. And they push them to the extreme. So their advertising platform, the Retail Media Network, has scaled to, in a decade, it scaled to $35 billion. I think it's much more than that now. Those are the last numbers I heard.
Right.
Their B2B marketplace also scaled to 30 billion in a decade, targeted to be close to 80 billion in several years. So really, they push the limits on what can be done. Not everything they've done has been a success. They had Pantry, which they tried different models. They had the Amazon phone, which they learned from. They learn from these things and they adapt them into FBA, or Amazon Alexa was more or less an outcome of the failed Fire phone.
Right.
So they can't say everything they've done has been a glowing success, but they've certainly learned from it and innovated, and that innovation is what has kept them as a leader.
For sure. And I think you're right. They're definitely pioneers. So the rest of us have the benefit of learning from their mistakes and also adapting their best practices, right? So,
right.
Awesome. So before we get into the next set of questions, and we've actually covered a lot of ground already, I do want to just remind everybody out there that we can take some questions at the end of this conversation. So if you have any questions, please do drop them in the comments field, and we'll be sure to get to them. All right. So Tom gave you a little break there, but we're back at it.
Thanks.
So what do you think should be the best, sorry, not the best, but the first step in developing your own multi-vendor marketplace?
So usually we start off with strategy engagements. We have a team that focuses on this for probably about a third of our clients start with a strategy process. And that involves, part of the major output of that is the financial model, the budget, ROI, the tech stack selection. But really, to get to that output of a strategy engagement, we really focus on things like competitive analysis, category selection, what are AOVs, conversion rates, potential sellers within certain categories, what's an ideal commission structure, usually a grid based on certain categories at maybe 10, 15, 20% commission structure on those goods. Who are some of the types of sellers you want to recruit? How you're going to write your terms and conditions for the sellers? And in the business model, defining some of the success criteria, including KPIs and setting up some performance management post-launch to achieve that success.
Absolutely. For sure, the strategy is key, but it sounds like it has a lot of components. So it's quite detailed, I'm sure.
And very different than e-commerce strategy. So definitely a lot of different considerations.
For sure. So let's talk about maybe some best practices or must-haves. And I have a feeling you have a really robust answer to this.
Yeah, got 470 pages here.
There you
So
go.
not so much trying to sell it. We priced the book as cheap as we could on Amazon. So the Kindle version is $2.99 if you want it.
There you go.
And I think $14 or $15 for the hard copy, more or less our cost. So lots of best practices in there. I'd say, and if you want to find that, just search for a Marketplace Best Practices book on Amazon. But we have 3 parts on it: what, who, and how. So what is a marketplace? Some of the underlying, like the platform dynamics I mentioned. Who are some example case studies of marketplaces? And the second half of the book is really part 3, which is the how section, and that includes things like the architecture. Not too deep into technology coding, but the big picture concepts of what you need in your architecture. The software platforms, which includes commerce, customer-facing e-commerce engine, and seller-facing marketplace platform. You need unique payment solutions, tax solutions. Again, Nexus, for example, in tax calculation is not where the marketplace operator is. The Nexus is where the seller is. So you have to deal with some complex situations there, as well as the KYC, know your customer requirements for onboarding dozens, hundreds, or thousands of sellers. The know your customer liability for anti-money laundering and issues like that. So some things along that front. Organizational structure. We have a chapter about that. As I mentioned, it is different roles you need: somebody to recruit sellers, onboard sellers, support sellers. Do curation of the catalog. Again, you're not going to be merchandising each item. You let other parties merchandise it, but you still can curate which products get added to your site, which review those. If you want to have a human review it, or it can be their platforms with AI enabled,
Right.
quality control.
At least set the standards, right, for merchandising.
I'm sorry, does it?
Or at least set the standards for product merchandising.
Yeah, exactly. And you can have basic rules like the merchandising description must be a minimum of 100 characters and a maximum of 2,000 characters.
Right.
And if you're like selling sports goods, but you don't want to allow guns or ammo on there, you can have explicit keywords to limit those. So lots of automation can happen there to scale. Again, as you scale to hundreds or thousands of sellers and hundreds of thousands or millions of third-party products, you need a lot of those automation tools to scale appropriately.
Absolutely.
KPIs, measuring what are the proper metrics, because you have a whole different set of metrics when you're measuring a marketplace than an e-commerce system. You need to make some tweaks to your user experience, as you may have multiple sellers of one product. Who wins the buy box, the curation process. So there's quite a bit in the how-to in the chapter in the book.
Absolutely. I think it's a great read, available on Amazon, as you mentioned. So you touched on some of this earlier in regards to resourcing. Can you share a little bit more about some of the things that will be required when launching a marketplace? So you're talking about technology, people, and systems.
Sure. From the people aspect, I mentioned the exponential curve. So the good thing from the OpEx side is you have a much lower organizational need to scale the business. You don't, if you double your SKU count, you don't need to double your merchandisers, right? That's all outsourced to the third-party sellers.
Right.
If you double your catalog size, you don't need to double your warehouse space or double your number of distribution center workers. That's all done by the third-party sellers. So the organizational scalability goes down, but it's some different skills, and you don't fire the merchandisers. You typically transform them into curation management and seller management people that focus on which categories you want to expand into, which products you want to add on, and so forth. So there are some different changes in the organization. The technology, you have a commerce platform, which most people know about, the Shopify and Salesforce Commerce Cloud and Adobe Commerce Magento and Commerce Tools, et cetera. But what a lot of people don't know about is the marketplace platforms. And there are a couple dozen actually platforms for marketplace operations. There are 8 or so that are really the top tier. We actually published a report called the Marketplace Sweet Spot, and you can download a free report on that, www.marketplace-sweetspot.com. There it is in the screen. And that has a really detailed, Gartner Magic Quadrant level or Forrester Wave detail, actually more detailed than those reports, comparing the top 8 marketplace platforms. With the market leader in terms of most feature rich and capabilities is Miracle, but also a 6 to 7 figure investment,
Yes.
down to solutions that are 5 or 6 figure, 5 figure investments, sometimes even 4 figure investments like Webcool. The capabilities, of course, are hugely different in between. You've got companies like Marketplace or Logic Broker, VTEX, Spryker, that have varying levels of capability and varying strengths or weaknesses in between those two extremes of a 7-figure purchase versus a 4-figure purchase.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's definitely a lot more players in that space now, so it's gotten interesting for sure.
Has.
Yeah, looking forward to reading through that report for sure.
Yeah, and another element that's important here is, and I know this is something that GeekSpeak does really well, is the taxonomy and the harmonization of data. Because as a marketplace operator, it's important to structure the catalog and structure the attributes within a product category and the attribute value pairs, so that your catalog as the marketplace operator can most easily sync with the catalog structures of the third-party sellers. So that's a very important activity. You mentioned some of the systems and other activities. That's very important for successfully launching a marketplace.
You're absolutely right, and that's an area that we work in a lot, as you know. So it's really, setting the standards from a marketplace perspective, so that you've got the right templates in place in order to collect the information that you need, either from a back-end business perspective or to even share those product specifications on the front end with consumers. So it's a challenge that I see across marketplaces and retailer sites for sure, but it's incredibly important for findability.
It is, and it's not the sexy thing. Everybody's like, "Oh, I've got AR and VR, and look at this metaverse e-commerce." That is sexy and it grabs headlines, but what really makes e-commerce and marketplace work is the data. It's the hard and not so sexy activity, but it's the backbone of e-commerce.
Definitely not flashy, that's for sure. All right. So you've got a lot of experience and you're obviously immersed in the marketplace space. Can you share any examples of marketplace owners that you think are really standing out from the crowd, and maybe explain what they're doing differently?
Well, I think the most successful ones go after a niche and own that niche. It's a little too late to try to be the everything to everybody. You're going to end up being a nobody to everybody. So Amazon, Walmart, have already kind of conquered the everything for everybody store. So it's more important to have a niche. And there are literally hundreds of marketplaces out there. Actually, DC 360, Digital Commerce 360, has a good report on marketplaces. I think we just sponsored a B2B focused one. Happy to send that out. If you want to distribute that afterwards. But the DC 360 report of 300 plus marketplaces, and the really successful ones have unique value adds. Oftentimes they build trust, they build community, they have specific content. Examples of value add. A decade ago, would people have thought about getting into a stranger's car and then going to sleep at a stranger's house? No, it's
absolutely not.
The trust that Uber built into their marketplace for services, for transportation services, and the trust that Airbnb built into their marketplace for lodging. Community can be content driven, like House. A lot of people have gone on there to look at some ideas for remodeling their kitchen or their house, but then they find a contractor that can do the kitchen remodel that's selling their services on that marketplace. And it can be all kinds of niches. We have one client we built a marketplace for that sells nuts and bolts. They sell fasteners, but they have scaled the marketplace to have 500,000 fasteners. If you want rivets, nuts, bolts, screws, marine, stainless steel, aerospace rated, whatnot, that's the place to go, because they kind of own that niche and they have those value add of such a broad catalog. Another value add example is StockX and Goat. These two marketplaces start off for sneakerheads. If you want to buy $1,000 or $2,000 pair of sneakers, It's nice that from somebody else, it's nice that those companies, those marketplaces will validate that, yes, this is an authentic, I don't know, 2004 Air Jordan that's worth $1,000+.
Mm-hmm.
So again, all these unique value adds. We have one client, ChemDirect, which distributes chemicals, and it's unique in that, you know, the hazmat requirements. You know, if you need to ship a rail car full of a toxic chemical or hazmat, even down to a few grams, that's hazmat. You're not going to ship through FedEx or UPS. You've got certain shipping requirements and knowledge about those products and safety data sheets. Again, very unique value add areas in their markets, and they can own those markets. It's not necessarily a winner takes all, but they're usually several take all. So Uber and Lyft for transportation. There are multiple of these, you know, Airbnb and VRBO for lodging. There can be multiple winners, but usually not the dozens that will enter a market. Usually boils down to a handful that will be the winning players in that niche marketplace area.
Yeah, agreed. I think niche marketplaces are just so important, and ultimately they become destinations, right, for people who are looking for that specific set of services or products. So definitely agree with you there. So there are plenty of direct-to-consumer marketplaces out there, but there are also a lot more B2B marketplaces cropping up, and you've touched on this a little bit earlier as well. Are there any unique considerations that marketplace owners and sellers need to factor into how they operate or even build the business on a B2B platform?
So a lot of it is similar to what we see in B2B commerce. So it could be credit terms, approval workflows for orders that are, you know, grouped together, and doing the organizational modeling of a client. So this person can request, this person can approve, this person can submit for payment. Within the organizational RFQ capability, where you want to quote for, you know, perhaps a custom configuration or a high volume of products. A lot of times they're contract pricing, which can get a little bit interesting when you have third parties with separate pricing. So a lot of those B2B commerce capabilities also flow over into the B2B marketplace capabilities. I mentioned some of the other requirements for like hazmat or shipping, you know, other than parcel post. It's when you can always rely on UPS, USPS, and FedEx for partial post shipping, but when you go to LTL and container type shipping, you've got a whole different type of fulfillment challenge to deal with. And there's in general, we've found that the B2B organizations tend to be further behind in their technology adoption or the digitalization of their business. So there's a lot of opportunity to improve. There aren't that, it's not that surprising to hear of distributors that are still getting fax orders and selling by taking you know, a box of donuts to their customers to win the deal.
Yes.
There's a lot of room for digitalization.
Yeah, I've certainly come across that over the years as well. You're right. You know, a lot of distributors certainly tend to be a little bit more archaic, but I see them coming along slowly but surely. That's for sure. So switching gears a little bit here, you know, the pandemic brought along a lot of different issues to deal with. But during that period, we saw a lot of community organizations or even small business groups try to band together to build marketplaces that would allow them to, you know, share in the cost of the marketplace build and to make the site more of a shopping destination for consumers versus, you know, all these small businesses having their own individual sites. What would you recommend to smaller businesses or even nonprofit organizations from a marketplace perspective? What are some things that are key to launching a marketplace in this respect?
Well, the first thing is to ensure that you have critical mass, and that's where a lot of smaller organizations can come together and make it happen. But to a certain extent, it may be also the opportunity to leverage existing platforms. So, for example, when you couldn't buy masks on the big retailers, Walmart or Target or even Amazon, a lot of people went to Etsy, where, you know, people were making masks at home and selling them, of, you know, perhaps of questionable filtering capability, but that was a platform for the smaller organizations to sell. So not necessarily, you know, creating a new marketplace, but selling on an existing marketplace might be an option. There are GPOs, group purchasing organizations, that leveraged that in the late 90s, early 2000s. The exchanges were kind of the buzz, which morphed really into marketplaces. And they're platforms that some of the bigger organizations like will use for e-procurement, like Ariba or Coupa, that are, again, more of the bigger monolithic company platforms. But if there is a smaller set of organizations that can pull together and create a marketplace, there is opportunity to do so. But again, my warning there is to ensure there's critical mass before trying to launch your own marketplace. We see a little bit of this with co-op businesses, like in grocers or DIY stores, other organizations that aren't necessarily one single organization, but more of a franchise style business. It can be hard to build consensus to make the investment to join together to operate a marketplace or even an e-commerce system.
Yeah, absolutely. Lots of great considerations there. And from what I saw from where I sit, a lot of the challenges really came from the cost to launch and, getting the funding to get going, especially when you're dealing with so many small businesses. And government tried to jump in to support, but I think the startup cost was certainly a big barrier.
Right.
So we've spoken a lot about, marketplace owners. Let's switch gears a little bit and talk about the sellers. What are some of the benefits to selling on a marketplace?
So what we typically see, I guess it varies on the seller, but let me give a couple different use cases. There are a lot of companies, in fact, thousands of, tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of companies that have become brands on Amazon. And then marketplace aggregators were acquiring these. So now that's cooled down, obviously, with the stock market changes and interest rates and the VC funding changing. But in 2021, I believe it was, there was $12 billion was poured into aggregators like Thrashio and Heyday that acquire an Amazon seller once a week. Every week they're acquiring a new company that's a brand that maybe and they typically classify the sellers into 5-fig, 6-fig, 7-fig, 8-fig sellers. That's how many figures they're selling. Is it 100,000, a million, 10 million, or 100 million? And these aggregators will buy those companies. So, but back to your question of what's the benefit to the sellers, not so much the aggregators or the exit strategy, but usually customer acquisition is the first. They gain access to all the buyers on that marketplace. So that's a great way to launch. And a lot of times companies will start these pure seller-based businesses will start on Amazon, then add Walmart, depending on their category. Maybe they go on to Etsy or Target or other marketplaces. But somewhere in there, like their third, fourth channel might be a D2C site. A lot will launch a Shopify site. That's kind of the most common option. Sometimes it could be BigCommerce or Magento, but you see a lot of Amazon sellers transition to a D2C channel on Shopify. Once they've built up some customer acquisition, and there's some tricks in migrating some customers from Amazon or Walmart or whichever marketplace over to the D2C channel. And typically they'll do more customer acquisition on the marketplace, but more margin profit on the D2C channel.
Yes, absolutely. It's certainly more competitive on the marketplace for sure. Okay. So, you touched on the great benefits of selling on a marketplace, but there are also some challenges along the way for sellers because each marketplace is set up a little bit differently, different standards and so forth. So what do you think are the key considerations when sellers are trying to decide which marketplaces to actually sell on? Because there's a lot involved. It's not just selecting which one.
Yeah, definitely. So I'd say probably the first is the customer base. So is that a customer base that you want to target? Generally, almost everybody looks at Amazon. So that's usually one of the first considerations. But if it's general merchandise, then it might be going to a Walmart or Target. If it's more crafty, then an Etsy or eBay. If it's more fashion, then there are certainly marketplaces focusing on that, or home goods, Wayfair. So there are different marketplaces that sell different categories and different customer segments. So focusing on that. Another factor that's important is those terms and conditions, including the commission fees. So what is it 10%, 15%, 20%? what are the restocking charges? Another consideration is the advertising options and what the fees are for that. Are fulfillment options available? So FBA or Walmart fulfillment, fulfilled by Walmart. There are lots of options for that side as well.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the negative of this is, the positive is there are lots of options there. But the negative is, a study showed by Marketplace Pulse showed that half of every dollar that a Amazon seller sells for on the marketplace, half of that money goes to Amazon, which sounds staggeringly high. And the commission structure might be 15% as a commission structure, but they may also pay 15 or 20 cents on every dollar for advertising, and maybe a similar outlay for fulfillment, for warehousing and fulfillment by Amazon as well. So there can be quite a few fees. Now, the flip side of that is they don't have to build their own warehouse. They don't have to pay for shipping. They're not paying on Google, or that maybe they're redirecting some of their Google ad spend to Amazon ads. And it works. A lot of these companies have proven that paying 50% out of every dollar to Amazon works to grow a business, to make money, but it's a lot of money. It's something that has to be considered.
Yeah. No, absolutely. All great points. I mean, the fees, fulfillment, all of that. And, just anecdotally, in working with some of our 3P seller clients, it's also, how many friction points are there, because often a lot of marketplaces don't realize how much static they create for sellers, and it's not exactly easy to sell on the marketplace. So I think that's a big consideration as well.
Yeah, a decade ago, nobody would have thought that Walmart is the gentler, friendlier retailer. And compared to Amazon, they are. People like Walmart terms and conditions and service and support better than Amazon.
Absolutely.
Not as big of a customer base, but
yes, but certainly for some sellers, an easier marketplace to sell on, for sure.
Yep.
All right, so I'm just going to take a peek and just see if we have any questions from our audience here. So we've touched on, marketplaces from the owner's perspective, the seller's perspective. What about consumers? What are the benefits of to the consumer group from shopping on a marketplace?
So it depends if it's B2C or B2B. So and let me start with the B2B case, because that's some of the things that we talked about. So the group purchasing, consolidating invoices, having that approval workflow, not having to have multiple vendors to source goods from. That certainly is a great benefit to the sellers. There's also the much broader selection. So marketplaces, just by the nature of scalability and the number of third-party sellers that can add to their catalog, have a much better selection, and that can lead to far fewer out-of-stock situations, or the ability to do substitute sell. Everybody talks about upsell and cross-sell, but substitute sell is the kind of the cousin that gets forgotten. When you're out of stock of something, which happened a lot during the pandemic and supply chain challenges of last year, that's very critical for buyers to be able to source what they're looking for. A lot of times better delivery options, and that could be either from the fulfillment of the marketplace like FBA from Amazon, or it could be from having 10 sellers of the same product located across the country, and the one closest to you can get it to you cheapest and fastest. Pricing is usually better on the bigger marketplaces as sellers compete and drive down the price for the end consumer. Mm-hmm. Not always. A lot of people prefer switch buying from Amazon just because it's easier, it's more convenient, it's not having to create a new account on yet another D2C site and loading up your credit card there. So a lot of benefits for the consolidated buying.
For sure. You touched on a lot of great points. And it's funny because last weekend I had the opportunity to visit a friend in rural Nova Scotia. And we're talking about a small village, not even a town, probably about 1,000 people. And we were looking at some products on Amazon. And I thought, do you have to, I asked her if she needed to go into the next town over to pick up the product somewhere. She's like, no, I get it delivered right to my door. And, her nearest neighbor is probably 3 kilometers away. So I was just blown away by that. I mean, it's incredible the reach that Amazon has, and also the access that people all around the world, regardless of where you live, now have, right?
Right. right?
All
And
right.
in different geographies, there may be different marketplaces that are serving those customers, but still that platform business model is what's enabled them to scale. Again, not just in physical goods, but in groceries and meals, DoorDash or Instacart. There's, whatever you want, there's usually a platform business that can enable getting it to you quickly.
So many different options these days, for sure.
Yeah.
All right. Well, listen, that was an episode chock full of great information. Thank you so much for all of that, Tom. And, thank you to everybody for tuning into this episode of Point of Purchase. I really appreciate you sharing your knowledge. So, Tom, if our audience is interested in learning more and reaching out to you, how can they get in touch?
Sure. So we have a lot of great resources. I mentioned some of those white papers, the marketplace maturity model. McFadyen.com/resources, and we've got a funky spelling there. McFadyen.com/resources. So a dozen or so white papers and recorded videos of specific unique things like payment on marketplaces, tax on marketplace, seller recruiting, advertising on marketplace, all kinds of different unique white papers or videos. And then if you want to follow me on LinkedIn, feel free to do so, or connect with me. Tom McFadyen is my ID, TOMMCFADYEN, after the linkedin.com/in URL.
Awesome. Thank you. And we've made you do a lot of work here today, but we do like to wrap up with a bit of a fun question. I want to ask you, what was the last unique or unusual item you ordered from an online marketplace? And what was your experience like?
Okay. Maybe not the last item, but the unique things I buy on eBay actually are live fish. So I have a koi pond, and over the past 5 or more years, I've probably bought over 100 live fish from eBay.
Wow.
And again, some of the unique criteria of that is I want to find a trusted seller, somebody who has lots of ratings and has successfully delivered live fish without diseases that are going to introduce to my koi pond. Somebody that has the ability to let me pick individual fish and throughout a week or 10 days, pick a dozen or 2 dozen fish, add them to my cart, and then check out in one payment and one shipment, one 30 or 40 pound box of water and fish, live fish to my house, and wide variety and a trusted seller. So a lot of those benefits of the marketplace enable me to buy koi fish from for $10 or $20 on a marketplace instead of $50 or $100 at a local retailer.
That's wild. I never would have thought you could buy live fish from a marketplace, but I mean, why not? You could buy everything else, right? So that's incredible. So is there any special labeling on the packaging that comes with it?
It does say live fish, keep out of sun, but they're padded. They put oxygenated water, or sometimes medicate the fish to slightly sedate them. Again, that's all specialty of the qualified sellers, but overnight shipping or it arrives within less than 24 hours.
Wow. So in addition to all the e-commerce marketplace gems you've dropped, I've also learned about live fish being sold online. So that's awesome. Thank you so much.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you for having me. It's been an honor to chat with you today, Tricia.
No, I really appreciate your time. Thanks again, Tom. And thank you to everyone who joined us today. You can watch recordings of this episode on LinkedIn or YouTube, and we will have a recording available on Spotify as well. If you're interested in learning more about GeekSpeak, check us out on geekspeakcommerce.com and follow us on LinkedIn to see when you can catch the next episode of Point of Purchase. Have a great day, everyone. Thanks, Tom.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.